Hi, this is your host, Susan Telford. Today, Miranda Macpherson has joined me to talk about spiritual surrender and the development of trust. Miranda Macpherson is an interfaith minister, spiritual teacher, and author who shares a feminine approach to surrender and non dual realization based on a practice that she calls ego relaxation. Her wisdom and palpable transmission invites others to become more graceful human beings through inquiry, meditation, devotion, and psychological integration. Grounded in extensive study of the world's wisdom traditions and inspired by Sri Ramana Maharshi, A Course in Miracles, and the Diamond Approach, Miranda has been guiding others into direct experience of the sacred for 30 years. In her 20s, Miranda founded the One Spirit Interfaith Foundation in London, where she trained and ordained over 600 ministers and counsellors. Today, Miranda leads retreats internationally, serves as core faculty at the Shift Network, and advisor to the Association for Spiritual Integrity. Miranda's books include The Way of Grace, The Transforming Power of Ego Relaxation, which is published by Sounds True, Boundless Love, published by Ebury, and Meditations on Boundless Love, published by Sounds True. Miranda is also a kirtan musician with 2 mantra albums, The Heart of Being, and her new album, which has just been released, Living Streams of Grace. Miranda is unapologetically feminine, joyful, and down-to-earth in her way of being, and is dedicated to loving people all the way back into the freedom and wholeness of our true nature. You can learn more about Miranda at www.mirandamacpherson.com. Hi, Miranda. Thank you so much for being my guest. It's a
Hi,
pleasure
Susan.
to speak to you again.
Yeah, it's always great to be with you. Just before we hit play today, we were saying, oh, we could have so many different conversations. We should just hit play. So we've hit play now, and
We have
let's
indeed. We have
yeah.
indeed. So, the topic of our interview today is spiritual surrender and the development of trust. And I always like to begin my interviews by asking, how has that played out in your own life? When did you have to surrender and develop trust for what was coming next for you?
Mm. Well, many times I think that's been a theme throughout my life. For whatever reason, I've often noticed that I've found myself in situations where I've been kind of almost thrown into the deep end, into something I wasn't sure like how to navigate or how to move forward, and then somehow having to learn how to swim through it. And sometimes it's these places where we're at our edge and where we know it, where we know I of myself, of my familiar reference points and navigation systems and identity, I can't necessarily do this myself. And so for whatever reason, call it karma or just the deck of cards of my own personal life situation, there have been many moments where I've been feeling as if I've just had to sort of step into the unknown without being able to use familiar reference points. And my experience has been, I've found that there is a grace, that there is a living presence, an intelligence, a guiding force that is fundamentally loving. And I've discovered that through moments of being at the edge of myself and truly not knowing the way. It happened when I was a young person as a 13-year-old, and I was suffering from depression and was really asking, as I think we often do when we're young, when things don't make sense to us, when they're difficult or painful, or we start asking the big philosophical questions of being human, like, why is there so much suffering, and how come no one's talking about the really important things, and no one seems to really kind of know how to do it, or know how to do anything other than suppress or resist, or, where's the meaning? And I was asking a lot of those questions internally when I was a young person, and when I couldn't find the response or the support for what I was going through, somehow a surrender took place. And it wasn't like I was trying to surrender, it was more that I was really at my edge of capacity to be able to navigate those feelings in that situation. And it's always when we let go and just open, whether because there's no other choice, or whether because we start to learn that that's the name of the game of spiritual deepening, surrender, and it is, that something deeper and more real finds us. I call it grace, but it can take many forms and expressions. And so my earliest conscious spiritual opening was to the grace that I experienced as boundless love, as a loving presence, the totality, the depth of reality was love. The ground of everything and everyone that is loving. And that means
it's so hard to see that, though.
Absolutely.
When things are going wrong, I mean, we can take our current situation in the world just now with coronavirus.
Yeah.
The people's initial response might be, everything is going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
How do we move from that point of looking out into the world and thinking things are going wrong to even having a glimpse that underneath is love?
Yeah, well, you can't just tell yourself that. You have to obviously face what needs to be faced. And from the ego perspective, and when any of us are suffering, when I've been suffering, when I was suffering as a 13-year-old, as a young person, not feeling that I had the support or the understanding that I needed to deal with things that were very hard for me, it certainly didn't feel like the ground of reality and myself was love. I felt a complete disconnect from that, which is most people's experience. And then, of course, there is no trust, because our capacity to trust is based on the love, like the felt sense that even though weird stuff might happen, there might be a lot of twists and turns and unexpecteds, and things might not turn out remotely the way we expect. Nevertheless, when we let go, somehow the lovingness that is foundational can find us. Like maybe you or the listeners have had experiences of difficult moments where maybe you've lost someone you love, or you're going through a really difficult time where the rug's been pulled out from you in some big way. You've had some unexpected, difficulty or setback, and you're shaken by it, and somehow you go for a walk in nature, and somehow, though you know not how, something pierces you, maybe in the simple things like the sweetness of a bird song, or just sitting quietly by a little river. And somehow, if you don't just stay in the thoughts of the mind that tell you it's a disaster, things are wrong, if you just actually just be here and now, without trying to push past anything, somehow that goodness finds you. So that formative experience of boundless love, when it came online for me, I think of these big spiritual experiences that we can't chase. They find us when they find us, and spiritual practice and study certainly helps us, but it's not a mathematical formula, like X number of hours on a meditation cushion is going to produce this experience. it happens by grace. But the fact that that opening had happened when I was a young person helped me immensely for the ongoing surrenders that genuine spiritual practice will demand and require. So I feel that that early formative experience of tasting that the ground of reality is love, and that that's the essence of myself and everyone, that set me on the path of starting to deal with some of the blocks to my experience of loving presence and worthiness and hurts and heartbreaks and losses and beliefs and so forth, the stuff that everyone has. It actually meant that as I went further and deeper on the spiritual path, and all of a sudden you come to crossroads where everything changes and things start getting taken away, it seems, without you wanting or needing it. And, I've been through big phases of life where I've had to let go of everything. I knew everything I thought I was, everything I'd built, my very sense of self. And what I saw in those moments especially when I was 36, and was a huge sort of, ego absorption, I would say, that went on, and I had to let go of everything familiar, bar none. Every attachment I had, bar none, was sort of taken away, which is the classical, John of the Cross, dark night of the soul, which doesn't mean going through a hard time, although sometimes you can. What that actually means is that your attachments to familiar reference points are being dissolved. And so it's actually a profound and very important thing that is a requirement at times on our spiritual path. And when we have some prior education from direct experience that reality itself is beneficent, is loving, it helps us to say, okay, Om Namah Shivaya, let that happen. And that's trust, the capacity to allow letting go to take place, change, even change in who we think we are and what we think reality is. And that sounds easy, and it's not easy. Anyone who's listening who's been on a path, it's not easy when your marriage is coming apart, when everything you've worked so hard for in your career, there's nothing more you can do but let go, right? When you've given your very, very, very best and your best efforts aren't working anymore, and you have to accept that, right? And so this is what all spiritual practice is for us to be graceful in those moments and just to say, yes, thy will be done, whatever is, to allow dissolving. And so that will require us kind of working through what limits our capacity to trust the loving goodness that is the ground of everything, underlying everything. And inevitably, that relates to issues in our childhood. Inevitably, where we have felt let down by those we were looking to for constancy and loving support, where we've been on the receiving end of unkindness or, or worse, neglect, abuse, just ordinary sort of self-centeredness, the ordinary stuff of human imperfection and how that affects us, that leads us to conclude there is no loving goodness. There's nothing for me that I can actually lean into. We presume from our past experiences that reality is going to be like however those carers were, conditional in their loving, inconsistent in their care for us, not reliable, And so we not only develop beliefs about reality, but we also contract in our body and in our heart, and we brace to try to hold ourselves, because it's scary and it's painful when we feel alone, unsupported, don't feel connected. You know, those are very difficult human experiences. And so the work is learning to stay present with those foundations of our own mind. And as we stay present and open towards whatever has led us to mistrust, the beliefs, the emotions, the feelings, the memories, the sensations, and we just practice ego relaxation with it, which means we relax in those places in our consciousness. We don't pick up a defense or a strategy. We just be there, doing nothing. It's paradoxical to the mind. The mind thinks, if I don't figure this out, find a strategy, or somehow package it up neatly, then, I'm going to be stuck in this place forever. But actually the opposite's true. It's paradoxical, right? Because staying present and doing nothing, no strategy to change or fix or rearrange, is actually surrender of ego control. And that's what allows grace, living presence, intelligence, healing qualities, transformation to take place. But it needs us to not keep picking back up the reins to try to figure it out and fix it ourselves. So a large part of how we develop trust is we meet our mistrust. We learn to stay present and face it and understand it with love and compassion, courage, curiosity. And we just be there, doing nothing. And that's how we're found. So the mistrust melts, and the hurt and the history and the suffering that is contained within the mistrust melts. Like ice will melt when it's contacted by the warmth of the spring sunshine.
So you say do nothing, but is there a place for psychological work in this?
Yeah. This is partly psychological work, because what you're meeting, if you going towards your mistrust, is psychological work. So you need to see, well, what is causing me to not experience the loving goodness? I mean, I could sort of spend a few minutes and just point some things out to you that give you plenty of evidence for that the ground of reality is loving goodness. For example, take a look outside in nature and notice how every single plant is lovingly sucking in human carbon dioxide and giving you back clean air. And a press release is not needed from any one of us for that to be happening all the time. You notice how somehow, even though it might not be coming from people that you would hope or expect, there's kindness that somehow emerges, whether from animals or strangers, or maybe just listening to this podcast now you feel a kindness, a caring quality that is inherently loving, right, and valuing of everyone. You might notice that as you get older on the path, no matter how difficult the tangle, somehow the dawn comes again. There's certain things that are reliable. And particularly when we study nature and we're taught, the way things naturally are, it's pretty intelligent and loving.
Yeah.
Right? But the fact that we lose contact with that tells us that something happened along the way. And it happens for every human being.
Yeah.
We call it a fall from grace spiritually. But psychologically, that involves, things when we didn't get our needs met, or involves being on the receiving end of our parents, our carers, undigested issues that come out as their anger or unkindness or self-centeredness in a way that is very painful and difficult. And, so that's all psychological material, right? The way that lands on us and the feelings we have. So when I say do nothing, that means you have to feel that, see that, face that, and do nothing. So the do nothing isn't a passive, just waft off into a transcendental state. Quite the opposite. It's more muscular. It takes a lot of courage and compassion and dedication to stay present as you face yourself, as you face what has led you to mistrust and feel disconnected from the loving goodness of reality and yourself. What hurt your heart so that you close down and live in fearful thoughts? Right? So we stay present with that and feel it and see it and understand it and do nothing. No strategy.
Yeah. So I think that just as I said, we can look out into the world and think that everything is going wrong. When we are wounded in that way, when we have those experiences, often we think there is something wrong with me.
Yeah, right. And there's a psychological reason for that. And, in that a young child, to survive, needs to maintain their relationship with their parents, particularly their mothering figure. We know, instinctively, when we're 5, mother equals survival. We know that. We are dependent. And so we will do whatever is necessary to interpret difficult things in a way that maintains that bond because we need it. So a child doesn't know, mum was traumatized as a child herself. She doesn't have the capacity to be patient and kind in this way that we need it. That must mean I don't deserve it. That must mean I'm not lovable. That must mean I don't matter. That must mean it's my fault. There must be something wrong with me. Right? That's not objective truth. It's a child's survival instinct operating psychologically to protect the bond with mother, which it has to do, by laying a foundation, it's because of me. The lack of responsiveness to my needs is because I don't deserve it. And so a lot of that work is, really intrinsic to deep spiritual awakening, is just seeing that and understanding that jigsaw puzzle of, these kind of deep layers of identity that do have psychological and phenomenological parts to them. But whether it's psychological or phenomenological, the work is the same. Staying present, opening towards it, contacting it with courage, compassion, curiosity, and doing nothing. So this is not the same as what a lot of other non-dual teachers teach, which is just witnessing and trying to sort of transcend. I don't teach that. I teach go toward everything, and it becomes a portal. The healing, the transformation happens, and the wound, what seemed like a wound at first, actually turns into a portal. It brings you back to these essential dimensions that you are inherently good, that your value is not established by anything you achieve. You're valuable because you exist, right? And love isn't a commodity that we earn or get or give. It's who we are. And so we start to get that back, and it's not just an intellectual getting it back, it's like we feel that and everything changes. Oh, we start to retrieve our wholeness. And that gives us a lot more capacity for the natural trust to return. The trust that is not only a kind of a basic sense of well-being and ease and relaxation. I like how Hamid Almas, A.H. Almas, calls it basic trust, which is that felt so where we just feel, everything's okay, and we feel relaxed in our body, we feel it's all good, it's all right. But we also get the feeling of trust back in our heart. And the feeling of trust in our heart is that felt sense of lovability, loving presence that fills our heart and reclaims us. And the trust, when it deepens, also comes into the mind, and it opens up our view on reality to perceive without a filter, that can see that even though our world is very uncertain and things do change and the unexpected does come, and at some point we will die and other people we love will die, and we won't get a say in when that happens. Nevertheless, loving light is deep and powerful and ever present, and that is both loving and blessing us, and that we're part of that loving light fundamentally. And because of that, though we know not how, all is and will be well. And I don't know about you, but someone who studied A Course in Miracles for a long time, in my 20s and early 30s, it was my primary path. And there's a lesson in the Course in Miracles, one of the earlier lessons, that has really helped me so much. And it's the lesson, I do not know what anything is for. Help me to lean into trust, and that somehow there is a deeper evolutionary intelligence that is unfolding everything. And that without being Pollyanna-ish or remotely denying the difficulties of COVID, and as I was sharing with you before we started, I myself got very sick with COVID, so I know the suffering of COVID. Nevertheless, that beautiful teaching from the Course helps me to stay open to the grace that is there even when things are difficult. That there is possibility of purification, refinement, evolutionary change that is available in these fierce conditions, if we will lean in that direction. We have the choice to lean in the other direction, of course, and we're seeing a lot of that, a lot of locking down into extreme positions, and a lot of reactivity. But we have the choice to say, even with this difficulty of what COVID means in our lives, I do not know what anything is for. Stay open, lean into trust, and lean into wise responsiveness given that situation. And that the guidance and the loving support is there to help us to be wise with everything that we're facing in our life.
Seems to be so important to be able to access that guidance in times like this that are challenging.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think that a lot of that is based on having some kind of practice that brings us back to our deepest center. And I think that really getting serious about a real spiritual practice as part of your daily rhythm, and really looking at your daily rhythms and whether or not they support you in being intimate with your spiritual depth or not, is very important right now. And it's likely to be important as we continue, because who knows what the next twist and turn with COVID will be. But even without that, climate change and the absolute urgency for us to be open to make some very profound changes that will affect our life on so many levels, and to find the possibility to cooperate with one another is going to be a requirement. And so far, even in the spiritual world, I feel a great sadness at the lack of that happening. And I feel a great desire just to speak to those of you who are listening and say, just be very careful about locking down into an extreme position about this or that, and remember that what we need to do most of all is to be in our center and to collaborate constructively with one another around things that aren't just about one's personal choice and freedoms, but that enable all of us to have the chance at leading a good life. And ultimately, that's what the spiritual path is about anyway, evolving beyond self-centeredness.
Yes.
Just me and what I want, what I think. The whole path is about that.
Yeah. So what kinds of spiritual practices would you recommend for getting in touch with your depths, with the truth of you?
I mean, that's a big conversation, but I think something that grounds you. And for most people I know, part of what is very grounding is walking in nature. It's a very simple thing. You don't have to believe anything. But to get out in nature as often as you can and just walk. And to do it consciously, not listen to a podcast but actually to be present in your body and to feel the earth under your feet and to look upon everything your eyes light upon as part of yourself. And as you're walking and breathing and just feeling your unity, your harmony with all that is, all the beings and elements that are, and to consciously, harmonize, let yourself be harmonized by that. It's a natural thing anyway. Nature, for most people, we feel calmer and more in harmony. But to consciously walk in nature every day is a great thing. I'm a big advocate of meditation, and there's a lot of different kinds of meditation, a lot of different types of meditation that I teach, but I think there's something that sitting meditation does for a person that nothing else does. It helps us to calm and to truly quiet down and to find peace and stillness independent of the externals, and to bring you into that intimacy, spiritual intimacy. So on my website there are tons of different meditation practices that do that in different ways. And I also think just whatever formal practice we find helpful is to also think of having what I call on-the-spot versions of whatever our formal practice is. Whether it's just in a few times during the day, just stopping and drawing back into the silence for 5 minutes. So for me, I just come back to the transmission of ego relaxation that came alive in Ramana's cave all those years ago. Sometimes I just stop and just be nothing, do nothing, get nothing, become nothing, seek for nothing, relinquish nothing. Be as you are, rest in God. And I just rest for 5 minutes and allow that being brought back to what I call the 0 point. Just dissolving back into God. all the ego thoughts and all the worries and the concerns just come back into the unity and the peace and the stillness that is what is. And from there, to just sort of ask, okay, what's needed now? Right? Move me in the door, some kind of prayer. Move me in the direction that best serves. And then I also believe that devotion is essential. Devotion is the powerhouse of any spiritual path because it switches on your deep heart and its love to be real, to be true, to apply the spiritual wisdom to our situation. And so prayer doesn't have to be, dear God, da-da-da-da. It can be something very simple, like just a prayer, move me in the direction that best serves. Put the thoughts into my mind and the words into my mouth that are healing and helpful. Help me to be a grace delivery device today. Help me to be real and present and true. So it's a leaning into the love and the support that is always there to apply and embody our deepest intention to the specifics of our situation. And I think ultimately it's the sincerity that is the really important thing. It's not the words you say, it's the sincerity that activates the grace to help you live that. And we need a lot of help. Rumi says, give up to grace. He said, the ocean takes care of each wave until it reaches the shore. You need a lot more help than you know. We do. And the help is there. And the more you open to that help, the more you learn how much it's there. And that you're not separate from the source of that help. It's like this infinity loop. You're in it, you're part of it, but it's loving and guiding and helping you to evolve simultaneously. Because that's divine being's nature, is to propagate and extend more of itself continually. As we see in nature, true nature isn't a static thing. Everything is interacting and unfolding and extending and unfolding more of itself with astonishing precision and intelligence, beauty.
In my own dark night of the soul, it was looking at the trees. I had a really bad burnout and was in bed for 6 months and lost my teacher. I was a high school teacher, lost my teaching career and was very depressed and angry at what had happened. And there were two things which really, you've really spoken to them. One was watching the trees outside the window because that was all I could do. And seeing that going through the seasons, the leaves coming off seemed to mirror everything that was falling away from my life. And the buds coming back gave me hope that there was new life and a new life would go on in some way. And then the full flourishing in the summer of what was emerging at that point. And the other point was the realization one day when I was in the depths of despair and not knowing even if I wanted to go on, was the realization that I was being breathed.
Beautiful.
Even the very breath was being given as a gift.
Right, exactly. That's so beautiful. Absolutely. And when you really reflect on that, and often I'm giving my students invitations to notice what is breathing you, the impetus to draw breath. It happens, it's there. What is causing your heart to beat? What is causing you to be interested, to open up and learn, even though you might be feeling and facing very difficult things. And so, that's partly why more and more these days I'm inviting people to get out, get away from screens, at least for some chunks of time, and just be in nature, because it helps, it teaches us a great deal and helps our nervous system to settle. And we start to feel the goodness, just the goodness that is inherent to existence, and that is sort of spacious but loving. And then we can feel the bird song that pierces our heart open with its beauty and its sweetness, and the beauty of the spring blossom. And we can notice that in the autumn time the leaves, let go. There's not an argument about the letting go or complaining. She's not complaining about, oh God, I have to let go. I won't let go. There's a letting go, and then it creates a spontaneous wabi-sabi art, right, on the ground as the leaves fall is so beautiful. And so being in nature also helps us to immerse in beauty that helps us to open and trust.
Yeah. And there's something in us that knows that.
Yes, but sometimes we forget. And so this is why podcasts, these kinds of conversations, you're sharing your experience and I'm sharing mine, they're very helpful in, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. And as we give it our attention, it becomes more full in our experience. So, in the 2-part series that we'll do, we're going to spend one of the sessions looking at our mistrust and what causes us to mistrust and how we work with that and how we let that be seen and understood and healed and melt and dissolve, so that those obscurations become less of a problem, right? And we'll also spend the other session looking at what actually really helps us to surrender and open up, what brings back and develops the musculature of deep trust. And it's really about starting to recognize the holding, the loving presence that is always here, and deepening our experience of that makes us not only more resilient emotionally and spiritually, but it makes us more courageous. The next time things are upended or the unexpected happens, we have more of a baseline inside of ourselves for this isn't necessarily something going wrong. It's okay. The mystery of life is wanting to do something new here. And we have more trust and can go with that process with less resistance and fear. And that is what makes us, more embodied in our spiritual wisdom, what I like to say, more graceful, which means we are able to be more responsive, elegantly responsive, rather than fearful and reactive. And that's a really powerful thing. It's a beautiful development, and it's what really helps our world too. It's very obvious, I think, to us all that the world really could do with a few more, spiritually mature human beings who are capable of staying present and trusting and open-hearted and responsive in chaotic situations.
Yeah. So Miranda, you mentioned there are 2-part series that you will be teaching for us in Evolve in February. So, just for those listening, that will begin on February the 7th and continue on February the 21st. So, I'm really excited about working with you again in Evolve.
Yeah, it'll be sweet, I know. And this is such an important subject. And, working with people as long as I have, I've come to see again and again so much of our capacity to surrender and deepen on our path and even just become a deeper, wiser human being. It all revolves around our capacity to trust. So we'll open that up together and do some experiential inquiry into it as well as a rich teaching, and it'll be practical as well as inspirational.
Yeah. So, are there any final words that you'd like to say before we conclude our time together?
Yeah, simple ones. I always say if all else fails, just remember this. Keep opening, keep softening, keep allowing your experience just to unfold itself.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you so much, Miranda. It's
Thank you
always
for
a
having me.
pleasure to talk to you. I
Yeah,
look forward to seeing you again in February.
sounds good. I'll see you then.